week, ladies and gentlemen. The time is flying by. Thank you for joining us in the garage for the Court of Public Opinion, and whether you're watching us on Facebook or you're listening to us as a, what's it called again, Pete?
Podcast.
A podcast! Yeah, dear oh dear. It must be sort of selective generational forgetfulness. But it is an amazing technology that I can listen to so many different things either on my iPhone or my iPad, which is probably what confuses me when I'm talking about podcasts. I think of iPod and iPad, and anyway, the bottom line is you're there, and that's what is important. We'll look at some of the things that have caught my eye during the day. Something which is interesting. We were talking the other day, Andy Martin, who has organised for this Facebook page to be put on as a podcast, we were talking about ways in which we can set up a small mixing console or switching box, and we can take phone calls. So we're working on it, ladies and gentlemen, because I get a lot of comment from people who would like to be involved in what we do, but technically I just don't know how we can make it happen. But I'm convinced that technology being what it is today, there is probably nothing that we can't do. So we just have to figure out how we get those calls to air on Facebook and on the podcast. But just to let you know that we are working on it. Happy birthday if you're having a birthday, or happy wedding anniversary, March 8, 1962. On this very day, the Beatles with Pete Best. He was playing drums for Ringo back then. They had a radio debut. I think Ringo had tonsillitis or something. Anyway, it was a cover of Roy Orbison's Dream Baby, How Long Must I Dream? Recorded the previous evening on stage at the Playhouse Theatre in Manchester. A little bit of Beatle history. 1946, the first helicopter license for commercial use. New York City, 1946. Golly. Martina Navratilova is the first tennis player, not just the first woman, you understand, but the first tennis player to earn over $10 million for the year. Wow. 1986. The New York Stock Exchange is founded in 1817. President Ronald Reagan is the first known to use the term evil empire when talking about the USSR in a speech in Florida on this day in 1983. The evil empire. Oh, that's an interesting one. 1495. 1495. John of God, Portuguese-born saint, founder of the Hospitaller Order of St. John of God, was born in Portugal. He died in 1550, but born this day in 1495. Why that's interesting is that can't remember how many years ago it was now, but I was asked to become a Knight of St. John, which is a very, and I didn't know, I'd heard, of course, of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, which is the knighthood that we are, most familiar with. But the knighthood of St. John goes back to the days of the Crusades, when the Hospitallers were the people who were charged with looking after the Crusaders. You can imagine that is way before the order of St. George and St. Michael, or St. Michael and St. George. So I'm very proud to be a Knight of St. John. I really am. A very wonderful group of people in every city and in most countries of the world. What else can I tell you? 2014, the Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 with 239 people loses contact and disappears, prompting the most expensive search effort in history and one of the most enduring aviation mysteries. They've never found what happened to flight MH370. Yeah, we probably never will, you know. 2014. The Young Ones with Cliff Richard released. On the back of it was Living Doll. It was a... was it Coronet? No, EMI, I would think, probably. Record. That was 1960. Yeah. Re-released 1986. You know, that man, while the radio stations never really played his music, Cliff Richard, every time he had a record release, it went to #1. And most people, the conventional thinking was, if you didn't get radio stations to play your music, you would never have a hit. He has defied that for a long time. I don't know when he fell out of favour with radio stations, but he did. But a great, enduring talent. Sir Cliff Richard. George Martin, British record producer, The Beatles, most notably. He dies at the age of 90 on this day in 2016, coinciding with that day back in 1962 when the Beatles had their BBC radio debut. That would have been before George Martin got involved too. Ferdinand von Zeppelin, the German general and inventor who founded the Zeppelin Airship Company, he dies at 78 on this day in 1917. And Joe DiMaggio, the American Baseball Hall of Famer, he dies of lung cancer in 1984 on this day in 1999. Some of the things that caught my eye on this day in history. Oh, Lordy, what are we going to do with Australia Post? Australia Post announces a loss. That's a big loss too. But it still baffles me. These people have a monopoly. A fabulous network, Australia-wide, 60,000 workers, one of the most respected brands in the country. They must be doing something very wrong. All right, I know people aren't writing letters the way they used to, but you have to anticipate sometimes. You know, you sit around a board table, I've done it often enough in my life, and you look at opportunities and threats and things that you don't really see at the moment, but you know they're out there somewhere representing either an opportunity or a threat. Perhaps the new boss would be well advised to offer the senior executives a bit of an incentive to succeed. Could I perhaps suggest, if it wasn't too rude, some Rolex watches? I don't know. What they did do, I don't know if it was around the boardroom table or not, but what they did do was to decide that they would simply charge more for a stamp, have fewer deliveries and close down some branches. With a blindfold on, ladies and gentlemen, and my hands tied behind my back, I could do a better job of running Australia Post than these clowns. I'm sorry. By the way, the smug self-indulgence, and may I say probably overpaid ABC, should rename itself I don't know what it could rename itself. Pete, have you got any ideas? They could call it the Gay BC.
I like that. Yes, I do like that.
Anyway, they continue campaigning. I suppose it's their right to do what they want to do, what they seem to think is right in broadcasting. But the agenda is unbelievably visible, but sadly not reported or open for discussion as it should be, apart from, of course, here in the court of public opinion. And if I can lay my hands on it readily, there was a story about, there it is. Yesterday they went on strike. Did you notice? Anyway, ABC staff were offered $1,500 bonus and a 10.5% pay rise on the taxpayer, but they still want more. And now, they walked off the job for 40 minutes yesterday, and it says here, even their strikes are lazy. Well, you're going on strike, you better do it properly. Come on. ABC staff plan to walk off the job for the first time in 17 years. Hundreds of staff held a 40-minute strike, 2 o'clock Tuesday, yesterday, probably just to coincide, of course, with the Reserve Bank Board decision. Oh, I don't know what goes through their mind. Anyway, they rejected the taxpayer-funded national broadcaster's offer of a 10.5% pay rise over 3 years with a $1,500 one-off bonus payment. No better offer was forthcoming when Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance Union representatives met with the ABC management. Dear. I don't know what you could say. Tell you what, if I'd known about it earlier in the week, I would have said, look, I tell you what. In fact, I think Ben Fordham suggested something similar on 2GB. He does breakfast on 2GB. We would have volunteered. You go on strike. We'll go on and say some things that wouldn't have been heard readily on the ABC for probably 50 or 60 years. Anyway, John sent me a comment. Doctors in China and perhaps Australia could be accused of playing God with regard to editing the human genome. Yeah, we talked about this the other day. What do you say about IVF? This is John. What do you say about IVF, where there is embryo selection? This is where only the perfect embryos are chosen to be fertilized. There's a tad playing God in there, isn't there? You do have a very good point, John. I don't know how to answer you. All I know is that if you can prevent disability, which is what my original story was about, and you can choose a perfect embryo, why the hell wouldn't you? I know I would. Well, you know, they even do it with fruit trees, genetically altered fruit and vegetables to get a perfect crop. Very common. But apparently you can't do the same thing with people, or not readily, or not visibly, or not publicly. I don't think I would make the final cut if push came to shove. I'd be edited out way before. How about you, Pete? Would you?
No, I would.
Yeah. Oh, well. However, it does put me in mind of the Darwin Awards, which is very funny, really. These awards, I don't know if you've heard about them. We used to do them regularly on radio. They're about those very special people who, how do I say this? Because of their stupidity in their lives, prematurely, and before having children, and thankfully do not contribute to the human gene pool. I don't know what the actual prize, except the naming of the person as the winner of the year for the Darwin Award. I'll tell you very briefly. I don't know how much time have I got left, Pete? I can't remember the year, but there was one great one that comes to mind, which was the fellow who bought the Winnebago camper van thing, you know, the truck, the Winnebago, and he took delivery of it, and he was driving down the freeway, and he saw cruise control. So he thought, well, I mean, he thought that's a good idea. So on went the cruise control, and then, you know, the music was playing, and sort of like a lounge room traveling on 4 or 8 wheels, you know, these Winnebago things, they're amazing. And he decided that he would go down the back, he'd put the thing on cruise, it was already on cruise control, he'd go down the back and make a cup of tea. So he did. He went down the back, he was sitting there, listening to the music and drinking his cup of tea, and the Winnebago went straight over the cliff. No laughing matter, of course, but you know, how stupid, how stupid. And the other one that comes to mind was the bloke who was sitting in his back garden, and he decided he'd go over and visit his girlfriend about 3, 4, 5 blocks away. And he had these helium balloons that he inflated, tied them to his garden chair, and he was thinking this thing through. He'd had a few beers, and he was thinking it through, and he decided that what he would do would be to sail over in the garden chair with the help of the helium balloons and visit his girlfriend. So he thought the thing through, and he thought, well, how am I going to land? So he went inside and he got his .22 rifle. Then he decided he needed some beer, so he took a crate of beer, his .22 rifle, and off he went. And I do mean off, because the helium balloons he had attached to the garden seat, chair, took him way beyond his destination. And the Darwin Awards, they publish a book every year of these amazing. And an incoming jet is reported to and recorded to have said to the control tower, flight, whatever it was, to control, we have in our path, slightly to the left, a man in a garden chair holding a rifle and drinking a bottle of beer. And of course the pilot just did it straight. But can you imagine people looking out of the windows of this jet and seeing this guy drinking his beer, floating along on the end of all these balloons in a garden chair holding a rifle? The plane landed and it was without event, but he found himself somewhere out at sea and was killed, died. And hence, for that year, he won the Darwin Award. Have I used up all my time, Pete?
Well, it's... we can go for as long as you want.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear. No, I think we might leave it there. I will just say this one last thing. We are continuing to spend $1 million. That's the budget. $1 million. The government, I mean, to tell parents and children not to use mobile phones in school. We're spending $1 million on advertising to tell parents and kids not to use mobile phones in schools. What a joke. Why wouldn't you just ban the mobile phone at the school level? If you have to send a note around to mum and dad, the parents, do it. You do not have to sell the idea, do you? At the cost of $1 million? It's quite bizarre. And what was the other thing you mentioned to me, Pete?
The live export.
Oh yes, this is the business of government telling lies, and they have lied about various things. But we see, and Pete and I care passionately about this business of live sheep exports. And I think it's worth something like $80 million a year to the Australian economy. That's all well and good. But how do you stack up the suffering of those animals, particularly to the parts of the world to which you are sending them, where, if you have seen some of the stories that 60 Minutes and other current affairs programs have done, it is absolutely atrocious what happens to those poor creatures when they get to their destination, let alone the suffering that goes on while they are being taken there.
That's the cattle as well.
Cattle as well, but the government came to power saying that they would put an end to the live export of sheep. Now they are saying, well, it's complicated. We'll have to do that in our next period in office, after the next election. Well, no, don't promise things if you can't deliver. What we have to do is to have truth in political advertising, state and federal. It's not out of the ballpark to ask politicians to do what they ask us to do. Truth in advertising is a law that exists in every category you can think of. Why not political advertising? Well, I'll tell you why not. Because they know they won't be able to keep their promises, and therefore they want to protect their arse. Not good enough, ladies and gentlemen. Let's talk tomorrow. I'm Jeremy Cordeaux. Believe in yourself. Thank you very much for viewing, and we'll talk in the Court of Public Opinion on the morrow. Bye for now.
They've loaded up another ship with 30,000 head. A death ship bound for the Middle East, and a callous halal death. Lambs to the slaughter, their throats slashed and bleeding, at the hands of heartless men without compassion or feeling. Where is the voice of reason when humanity is lost? When it's all about the bottom line, no matter what the cost. Suffocating in stifling heat, struggling for food and water, an indictment of mankind to put animals through the torture, or sleeping if they can on a bed of their own waste. It's cruel and indefensible, a government disgrace. Where is the voice of reason when humanity is lost? When it's all about the bottom line, no matter what the cost. Nothing in the face of mounting proof of cruelty unimaginable. They still won't see the truth. This is not the Australian way. This is not who we are. A barbaric trade that has no place in my Australia.